What if I told you that the opening line of the Gospel of John, one of the most foundational texts of Western civilization, and the ancient mystical text of Chinese Taoism are actually talking about the exact same thing?
And we don't just mean they share a similar vibe, right?
Right. Not just some vague metaphorical crossover. I mean, literally,
Yes.
structurally, like the exact same thing.
Which is, it's a massive claim. It completely short-circuits how we are normally taught to look at world history.
And totally.
Because we usually treat global religions and philosophies like they're entirely different species, just completely isolated from one another.
Yeah, you think of it like walking into this massive, incredibly disorganized library. Every single belief system is on a different floor, speaking a totally different language.
Exactly.
You've got your ancient Greek philosophy floor, your Eastern mysticism wing, your Western theology section, and you are just standing there in the lobby, staring at the directory, feeling completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of it all.
Yeah, you just think, I'm going to have to learn 100 different languages just to get a basic grasp on human truth.
Which is exactly the information overload problem we face today.
Right. But the source material we're doing a deep dive into today offers a radically different framework. It is an incredibly passionate and sometimes downright blunt lecture exploring Laozi's ancient Chinese classic, the Dao De Jing.
And the speaker's core argument is wild. They argue that the Dao De Jing isn't just some localized regional philosophy meant only for ancient China.
No, they argue it is the master key, like a single universal decoder ring for all global religions.
From Buddhism to Christianity to the ancient Greeks. And the vibe of this speaker is just fantastic. They essentially challenge the audience right out of the gate to wash their brains.
Which sounds intense.
Yeah, obviously not in some sinister mind control way.
Yeah.
But as a necessary intellectual exercise, they are demanding that you actively scrub out the rigid preconceived categories you've been taught.
Because those stripped categories are exactly what prevent you from seeing the glaringly obvious connections between these different cultures.
Exactly. So today, we're going to look at how this source connects those seemingly impossible dots. But more importantly, we're going to explore why adopting this framework could completely change how you process conflicting information, heated arguments, and, cultural differences in your own life.
But to get there, we have to completely redefine what the word Tao actually means.
Yeah, we do.
Because the way this speaker defines it is fundamental to the entire theory, and it fundamentally breaks from how it's usually taught in the West.
Yeah, that was a huge stumble for me at first. When I hear the word Tao, I immediately think of a philosophy, right?
Right, like a concept.
Yeah, like a vague moral guideline. Go with the flow, find your balance, the yin and yang, a concept for living a harmonious life. But the speaker takes a hard left turn away from that.
They absolutely reject that definition. The source is adamant that the Tao is not a concept. It is not a human-invented rationale or a philosophy, which in Chinese would be referred to as Daoli.
Right.
Instead, the speaker argues that the Tao is an objective, literal entity, a thing. The specific Chinese word they focus on is wu.
And this isn't just semantics, is it?
No, it is the fundamental pivot of the entire argument. If you think of the Tao as a philosophy, then it's subjective. It's just an idea Laozi had.
But if it's an objective entity...
Exactly. If the Tao is an objective, physical, or metaphysical entity that governs the universe, then it exists entirely independently of human thought.
To explain this, the speaker uses this highly specific, very funny analogy about pop stars. Because, explaining formless cosmic entities can get a bit dry.
It really can.
So they say, imagine pointing at a famous person, like the singer Andy Lau, or really any massive celebrity. Andy Lau is just a label.
Right.
It's a couple of syllables we agreed to use to identify a specific biological entity walking around on Earth. The label didn't create the person.
The person existed, and then we slapped a name tag on him so we could talk about him.
Exactly. The speaker argues that Laozi did the exact same thing with the universe. Laozi didn't invent the Tao. He didn't sit under a tree and brainstorm a cool new philosophy.
He discovered an existing, profound, governing entity of reality.
And he just decided to slap the label Tao on it because he needed a word to write down.
And the speaker backs this up directly with the text of the Dao De Jing itself. There's a famous passage where Laozi is describing this ultimate reality.
Oh, chapter 25, right?
Yes, chapter 25. He says there is a thing confusedly formed, born before heaven and earth. And then Laozi explicitly admits, I do not know its name, I call it Tao.
Wow.
He is openly confessing that the label is arbitrary. He's saying, look, I found this massive foundational architecture of reality. I don't know what its actual name is, so for the sake of this book, we're going to call it the Tao.
That distinction changes everything. Because if the Tao is an objective, universal entity that was there before the Earth even formed, rather than just a subjective idea dreamed up by a guy in ancient China, it means the playing field is entirely open.
Completely open.
It means anyone, anywhere in the world, in any historical era, could theoretically discover that exact same objective entity. And if they discovered it in ancient India or ancient Greece, they would just slap a different localized name tag on it.
Precisely. The entity remains constant, only the vocabulary changes.
Okay, let's unpack this. It makes me think of it like a universal operating system. Like the universe runs on this one base code, this fundamental OS.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. So Laozi stumbled upon the code, analyzed how it worked, and happened to name it the Tao. Meanwhile, other brilliant thinkers across the globe might have tapped into that exact same base operating system, but because they lived in different environments, they built different apps on top of it.
Right, they created different user interfaces in their own languages.
And named those interfaces something else entirely.
That is exactly the dynamic the source is establishing. It's the exact same underlying architecture. And once you accept that premise, that the Tao is the foundational OS of the entire universe, the source takes it to its logical and fairly controversial conclusion.
Yeah.
If it is the foundation of everything, then it must be the foundation of all the other legendary figures and religions throughout history.
See, because my immediate question was, okay, if this is a global decoder ring, how does the speaker explain Buddha or Jesus or Socrates? Do they just ignore them or say they were wrong?
Far from it. The source absorbs them completely. They pull from chapter 42 of the Tao Te Ching, which describes the Tao as the mother of all things and the door to all wonder.
The mother of all things, okay.
The logic here is airtight in its own context. If this entity is literally the mother of all things in existence, then absolutely nothing can sit outside of it. Every human, every philosophy, and every sage falls under its umbrella.
And the speaker explicitly name drops them to make sure you get the point. They say Buddha, Jesus, Socrates, Moses, all of them exist within the realm of all things generated by this mother entity.
Yes.
But I have to be honest, when I was reading that section, I found myself getting a little defensive.
Really? How come?
Wait, isn't that a bit arrogant? It sounds like a massive flex.
Right.
It sounds like the source is claiming that ancient Chinese philosophy somehow owns Jesus or Buddha.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like, hey, we got here first.
Yeah.
We wrote it down first, so your spiritual leaders actually belong to our system. That feels incredibly arrogant to me.
It does feel that way initially, and it's a very common reaction when someone claims to have the one true theory of everything. But the source is very careful to diffuse that tension.
Okay, good.
They are absolutely not claiming ownership. They are claiming absolute horizontal equality. The argument is that if a Greek philosopher, like Socrates, or the Buddha in India, reached a state of supreme universal truth, they were looking at the exact same cosmic entity that Laozi was looking at.
So no one is above anyone else.
Right. Laozi doesn't own the entity any more than Newton owns gravity. Newton just named it.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's like different astronomers standing on opposite sides of the planet, looking through different telescopes at the exact same star.
Exactly.
They might draw different constellations around it, and they'll definitely give the star a different name in their local language, but it's the exact same ball of burning gas.
That is a perfect parallel. And the source points out the linguistic burden of these different names. For example, when the Buddha achieved ultimate supreme wisdom, the Buddhist terminology for that state, in Sanskrit, is Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi.
That is quite a mouthful.
It really is. It is a massive, multisyllabic, incredibly complex phrase meant to capture the ultimate enlightenment. The speaker argues that this massive Sanskrit concept is referring to the exact same universal truth, the exact same state of being that Laozi just concisely labeled with one single syllable, Tao.
Which is a beautiful theory. It sounds incredibly unifying. But, you know, it's easy to stand on a stage and say, hey, everybody was actually talking about the same thing. Let's all hold hands.
True.
It's another thing entirely to prove it.
Yeah.
If these sages really were downloading the exact same data from the universe, their foundational texts should reflect that, right? Unless their actual historical texts match up, this whole idea is just speculative wishful thinking.
And that is exactly where the source pivots from abstract philosophical theory into literal textual evidence. They start laying these ancient texts side by side to show you the blueprints.
I couldn't wait for this part.
And the overlaps are genuinely startling when you look at them through this lens.
This was the moment in the deep dive that completely hooked me. The comparison to the Bible is just wild. So the speaker brings up the Gospel of John.
Yes.
If you grew up around any Western Christianity, you probably know the opening line. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's this deeply mystical, foundational statement about the origin of everything.
Right, the concept of the logos, or the word, as the organizing principle of the universe.
Exactly. But the source points out something fascinating about how that text crossed cultural borders. When translators were tasked with translating the Bible into traditional Chinese, they had to figure out how to convey this massive philosophical concept of the Word that was with God before creation.
Which is not an easy translation to make.
Not at all. And the word they chose, because it was the only word that perfectly encapsulated that exact cosmological weight, was Dao.
Wow.
So in the Chinese translation of the Bible, that passage literally reads, "In the beginning was the Tao, and the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God." It explicitly says all things were created through the Tao.
It is a profound linguistic crossover. You have Western theologians trying to describe the ultimate source of creation, and when Chinese scholars look at it, they say, oh, you're talking about the Tao. We already have a word for that.
It's incredible.
And the speaker connects this biblical translation directly back to chapter 16 of the Tao Ching. There is a line from Laozi that translates to heaven is Tao. In Chinese, it's just 3 words, Tian Nai Dao.
Just 3 words.
The source argues that the Christian concept of a singular, all-powerful creator, God or heaven, and the Taoist concept of the universal entity are perfectly identical in their fundamental mechanics.
The speaker even jokes about the efficiency of it. They essentially say, look, it takes other traditions, whole books, and then complex parables to explain this cosmic architecture, and Laozi just wrapped it up in 3 words. Tian Nai Dao. Heaven is Tao. Boom. Done.
It's a great moment of levity. But they don't limit this textual proof to just Christianity. They pull from Buddhism as well.
Right, the Diamond Sutra.
Yes, the Diamond Sutra, chapter 23, which is one of the most historically significant Buddhist texts. There's a line that says, all dharmas are equal, there is no high or low.
No high or low.
Exactly. This perfectly mirrors the Taoist concept. If everything comes from a single mother source, then fundamentally nothing is superior or inferior. It is a philosophy of radical universal equality derived from a single origin.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, they point to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, referencing how Moses and all the prophets throughout history spoke of the exact same underlying truths, even if they used different parables.
So the core insight for you, the listener, is that if you strip away thousands of years of human interpretation, political maneuvering, and cultural baggage, and just look at the raw foundational source code of these ancient texts, they are entirely compatible.
Completely compatible.
Geography and a lack of technology just forced these ancient thinkers to use completely different vocabularies. I mean, thousands of years ago, Laozi couldn't just hop on a Zoom call with Socrates and realize they were researching the same physics.
That would have been quite the call.
Right. So the universe essentially provided a localized representative for each major region. You had Laozi for China, Buddha for India, Jesus and Moses for the Middle East, Socrates for Greece. They were all given the same assignment. They just wrote their reports in different languages.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating and frankly bizarre arguments in the entire lecture, because the speaker pushes this idea that the Tao is the literal physics of the universe to its absolute limit.
Oh, yes.
They argue that if you truly understand the mechanics of the Tao, it can explain things that seem biologically or physically impossible in other religious texts.
Oh, we have to talk about the Noah's Ark tangent.
I knew we'd get here.
I was reading this part of the source material and thinking, where on earth are we going with this? It's just such a bizarre but fun tangent.
It is definitely a sudden detour, but it illustrates a crucial point about how the source views the power of this entity.
Right. So the speaker brings up the biblical story of Noah's Ark, and they point out the practical, logistical impossibility of it. You have an ark that historically was supposedly only about the size of a sports field.
Which isn't that big, considering the passenger list.
Not at all. Yet somehow, Noah managed to pack the entire biological diversity of the planet onto this boat. And more importantly, you have carnivorous apex predators like tigers, wolves, lions, stuck in a confined space for a very long time alongside herbivorous prey. You know, deer, sheep, rabbits.
Right, which sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. From a standard biological perspective, the predators should have eaten the herbivores into extinction by week 2.
And this is where the speaker applies the framework of the Tao. They ask, how does a text that points to universal truth reconcile a glaring biological contradiction?
Okay, I'm listening.
The source argues that it comes back to the Tao being the door to all wonders. The specific Chinese concept here is miao, which relates to the mystical, almost incomprehensible wonders of how the universe operates at its root level.
Right, but how does that actually work? How does meow stop a tiger from eating a deer? Like, practically speaking.
The underlying logic the source is hinting at is that the Tao is the ultimate state of equilibrium and harmony. When you are fully aligned with the base code of the universe, when you enter the state of the mother entity, the localized, secondary rules of existence are suspended.
So biology just takes a back seat.
Essentially, yes. Hunger, predation, the biological drive to consume, those are all lower-level symptoms of a fractured, competitive world. If the ark was a space entirely enveloped by the pure state of the Tao, the animals wouldn't experience the biological friction of hunger or aggression.
Wow.
They would exist in a state of suspended animation or perfect sustenance, sustained entirely by the ambient energy of the source itself.
That completely flips how I look at those ancient myths.
Yeah.
It's not just, God did magic. It's the idea that these texts are trying to describe an override command in the universe's physics.
An override command, yes.
Right. It's saying that when you tap into the raw root of reality, the standard rules of biology just stop applying. It's a wild theory, but within the internal logic of the speaker's argument, it makes complete sense.
It does. It positions the Tao not as a set of rules, but as the fundamental reality that supersedes everything else.
But, this naturally leads to the elephant in the room. It's the obvious roadblock that any skeptical person is going to hit when they hear this theory.
The fighting.
Yeah, the fighting. If all these ancient sages were looking at the exact same truth, and if their foundational texts really do align so perfectly at their core, why is human history such a bloodbath?
It's a very fair question.
Why is our timeline basically just one long, endless reel of different religious, cultural, and ideological factions violently destroying each other? If we all share the same operating system, why are we always trying to crash each other's computers?
That is the ultimate paradox of human history, and the source does not shy away from it. In fact, they address it head-on with a very visceral, incredibly memorable metaphor. It perfectly encapsulates why we reject truths that look slightly different from our own.
The dog with chopsticks. I love this visual so much.
Walk us through the dog with chopsticks.
Okay, so the speaker says, imagine a dog, a normal dog, walking around on four legs doing dog things. One day, the dog looks up and sees a human being. The human is walking upright on two legs, and they are holding two little wooden sticks in their hand, chopsticks, and using them to carefully pick up food and put it in their mouth.
Okay.
The dog looks at this human and thinks, what an absolute freak. That is so unnatural. Why aren't they just putting their face in the bowl like a normal creature?
Because from the dog's localized, limited perspective, normal is four legs and a snout. Anything outside of that paradigm is immediately classified as bizarre, wrong, or alien.
Exactly. And the source argues that human beings do the exact same thing when we encounter a different culture's name for the truth. Because the truth arrives wearing a different cultural outfit or speaking a different language or using different rituals because it's using chopsticks instead of a snout, we immediately reject it.
We don't recognize the nourishment happening. We only see the unfamiliar tools.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We just see the unfamiliar tools.
And the source places the blame for all of this historical conflict squarely on the followers, not the founders. They use the term brainless followers.
Harsh, but clear.
The argument is that the original sages, the Laozis, the Buddhas, the Jesuses, would never fight each other. If you put them all in a room, they would instantly recognize that they were all talking about the same universal entity.
So where does the conflict come from?
The fighting only starts when the visionaries die and the followers take over. The followers don't actually understand the universal entity. They only understand the local name their sage gave it. So they elevate their specific, localized label into an exclusive club, and they try to violently dominate anyone using a different label.
The source actually makes a pretty bold, controversial historical claim here to illustrate how this factionalism works. And, we are just mapping out their theory right now and partially reporting what the source argues. We are not endorsing the historical accuracy or the politics of this statement.
Right, absolutely. This is just the source's lens.
But it's a fascinating lens to view conflict through.
Yeah.
They look at the Chinese Civil War. You had the Communist Party led by Mao Zedong and the Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek. two incredibly bitter, violent rivals.
Yet the speaker claims that even at the highest levels of leadership, there were moments of mutual recognition. They allege that Mao, at one point, expressed a cooperative desire for Chiang Kai-shek to chair the government. That's what the source claims. The implication is that true leaders, the people at the very top of the mountain looking down at the whole landscape, can often see the shared roots and the potential for unity. But the ideological camps beneath them, the factions who are entirely identified by their labels, cannot.
They just see the labels.
Exactly. The factions are the ones who inevitably violently clash because their entire identity relies on their label being superior to the other guy's label.
It's a tragic cycle, really. The visionary sees the whole universe, the follower only sees the name tag. And they go to war over the name tag.
And this brings us to the core lesson the source derives from the Dao De Jing to combat this exact tragedy. They point to chapter 81, which advises acting without contending. In Chinese, it's Wu Bu Zheng.
Acting without contending.
A true sage, someone who actually understands the Tao, recognizes the shared root of humanity. They see that the underlying operating system is the same everywhere, in every person. It is only those who don't understand the Tao, who are trapped by the superficial differences like geography, language, and cultural rituals, who feel the anxious need to fight and prove their superiority.
So why does all of this matter for you? You tuned into this deep dive because you are someone who loves to learn. You are constantly trying to synthesize vast amounts of information, news, opinions, and philosophies without feeling completely overwhelmed by the noise.
And that is where the true value of this somewhat eccentric, highly impassioned lecture really shines through. The ultimate takeaway here isn't that you need to go out, buy a copy of the Dao De Jing, and become a devout Taoist.
Right. What this source is offering is a survival framework for an era of information overload. Think back to that massive, disorganized library we talked about at the very beginning. When you walk out into the world and encounter wildly different political perspectives, contrasting cultures, or competing philosophies, you don't have to feel pressured to choose a side and go to war for your specific floor of the library.
You don't have to feel overwhelmed by the contradictions.
Instead, you can adopt the mindset of the sage. You can look for the Tao, that shared underlying root system. You can recognize that maybe beneath all the noise, they are all just using completely different words to describe the exact same human experience.
It is a profoundly unifying, deeply empathetic way to process a fractured world. It allows you to find common ground in places where everyone else only sees conflict. Which, brings us to a final, lingering thought for you to ponder as you go about your day.
Lay it on us.
If geography, time, and language forced the greatest minds in ancient history to use completely different words to describe the exact same universal truth, how many of the heated, everyday conflicts you witness today are doing the exact same thing?
Oh, wow.
Whether it's a bitter argument in your workplace, a polarized debate on the news, or even a tense standoff in your own family, how often are we just violently disagreeing over the names of things rather than the things themselves?
It really makes you wonder. The next time you find yourself stuck in the muddy waters of an argument, take a step back. You might just realize you are both staring at the exact same truth, just holding different name tags.